So I'm Chrissy Rivers. I'm the executive director of Hannah's House, located in the Waitsfield area, as well as in Waterbury. We're the community-supported nonprofit mental health and resource center here in the Central Vermont area, serving children and adults and families. And we also provide educational opportunities like this and an upcoming parent support group that will be announced in the next couple of weeks. So tonight we have Kevin Gallagher, which is great to have him back. We've had him in the past to do other educational events, usually in person here in the Valley. And on our 10th year, it's just great to have Kevin back doing it a little differently with the COVID situation, but nonetheless, we need the support, I think, even more. So this is great for parents, and feel free to ask questions using the chat function anytime, or verbally here on the screen. And it can be about your youth, your families. It could be adults, elderly. It doesn't matter. Kevin is ready to help us answer questions on all those topics. So Kevin's been a psychotherapist now for 30 years, serving basically all populations, it sounds like. So I'm going to hand it over to Kevin, and he can also let us know a little bit more specifics about tonight's Zoom situation.
But I'm so happy to have folks here today, and there may be more that sort of pop on. If you want to have your camera on, great, because I love being able to see people. But if you want to stay off camera, that is completely fine too, because I realize sometimes people are doing other things while they're listening. Because it's a lot of time on these devices lately. A lot of people, we started out with Zoom or with COVID fatigue, and I think we've now kind of moved all the way to Zoom fatigue. I don't know what the next will be like, Netflix fatigue. Like there'll be something else that we're getting really tired and sick of. But, I was thinking about our conversation today, and I was thinking about in April, we were all saying sort of like, thank God this happened in spring. Can you imagine how awful this would have been if it was in November? And back then, we sort of thought it probably wasn't going to be over by Easter, but we sort of thought it'd be over by June. And here we are in November, and it's actually even harder in our country right now in November than it was actually back in April. And so I'm particularly sensitive to the struggles that I'm seeing people have in my community, in my friend and family network, in my practice, in terms of families. And so Hannah's House contacted me and sort of thought that this might be a nice way to sort of, talk about COVID and the impact that the pandemic is having on people's kind of mental and emotional and physical health, but also give people an opportunity to ask some questions. So again, I'll remind you, at the bottom of your screen, there's a button for a chat function. It should pop up on the right-hand side of your screen. You can just type something in. I will go back and forth, cheaters. We did have some people that wrote some questions ahead, and so I will try to take those as well. We're probably going to be together for about an hour, and so I appreciate your involvement very much. And I want to remind you that this is being taped by MRV TV, and it will be aired at some point soon. And then we'll sort of go into their kind of library of things that people can view. And I think, Chrissy, this is also going to be available on Hannah's House website at some point as well. Yep.
It will be.
Yep.
Hopefully the next week or two.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, so I want to talk about anxiety first. Why, you ask? So I just had a client this morning saying to me, I just don't want to be anxious anymore. And I said, actually, that's not true. If you're not anxious, you're probably going to die. And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, so you're on Cape Cod last summer, and you go to the beach, and surprise, surprise, no one's at the beach, and you don't understand why. And you see a sign that there are sharks in the water. And so you put your chair and your cooler down, and you sit and you watch the water for about a half hour or so, and you sort of say, I think the sharks have already gone. Come on, everyone, let's go in swimming. So people who aren't anxious get eaten by sharks. So usually what people mean when they say, I don't want to be anxious anymore, is they mean I don't want to be pulled around and managed by my anxiety anymore, that I want to be able to manage my own anxiety, not have my anxiety manage me. And so anxiety is fundamental to, I think, probably most animals, including us. Like when you look at that squirrel in the road, like doing this thing, and you're trying to like not kill it, and you know, sort of like they're anxious, you're anxious. You know, that's what anxiety looks like. It's a warning system. It's an alarm that goes off in the species that is saying danger, danger, danger. And that lights up the amygdala, the feeling part of our brain. But it's with this frontal cortex part, our executive function, that we're supposed to try to determine the extent of the anxiety. So when people sort of say they wish anxiety would go away, typically they just sort of feel like, I want the feeling of anxiety to go away because I have a hard time thinking about the anxiety. And I'll say a little bit more about that. But because anxiety is fundamental to the survival of the species, everyone would like to be a little less anxious. You know, every pilot would like every passenger to be on anxiety medication. Every teacher would like every student on anxiety medication. You know, every person who has to, you know, go out on a stage and tell people that the performance, unfortunately, has to be canceled would like everyone in the audience to be on anti-anxiety medication. And so this is what makes anti-anxiety medication very addictive. So it's because everyone would love to be a little bit less anxious than they currently are. Antidepressant medication is not addictive. You know, if someone who's not depressed takes Prozac, that's probably going to have no effect. But if all of us today took a Xanax, we would feel a little bit better. It would sort of take a little bit of edge off. So if the whole human race is anxious, add a pandemic, and everyone's anxiety is higher. So if you sort of think of anxiety as humming at a higher amplitude globally. You know, I remember back in April or, yeah, it must have been still April, you know, hearing on the news that 97% of children in the world are currently not in school. And that number all of a sudden felt like gigantic. I'm like, oh my God, 97, like the whole world's children are not in school. And so you sort of think that it's very rare in our species that the entire 7.5 billion people would all be experiencing the same problem at the same time. And everyone is a little more anxious. And how people express that anxiety is varied. So the toilet paper hoarders that we all remember, that is not greediness, that is anxiety. I don't know how it gets placed on toilet paper. Some of the toilet paper manufacturers didn't know why toilet paper got singled out. There's never really been a problem in our country with toilet paper, but all of a sudden it became very important. I remember in May, there were people on the beaches in Gulf Shores, Alabama, and, you know, and interviewers would say, don't you think this isn't a good idea? Well, God won't give me COVID. You know, and we sort of listen to that and we think, oh my God, how could you be so stupid? I don't think this is stupidity. I think this is anxiety. It's sort of like, it's so hard to realize that this is what's going on in the world that I'm just going to say, it's not really. It's not really. It's fine. It's fine. So if you sort of, and I remember a day in Hannaford's parking lot, this guy comes over to me and starts yelling at me that I wasn't parked really well between the two lines. Mind you, there was no one at the store, so there was plenty of parking. And, you know, it's people like you that make parking hard. And I said, sir, I will move my car. And because I thought, I don't know why this fellow's this anxious, except for the pandemic. I bet before COVID, he didn't go around to Hannaford's parking lots and tell people how to park. Like it just was something about today, you know, kind of his last nerve. So our anxiety in general is just higher, and it's a warning system. It's wanting to get your attention. So let's say you were in my office and we were having a therapy session and the fire alarm on my ceiling goes off. It's strobe light and then a really loud, horrible, shrill sound. You would probably look at me and say, do we need to go? And I'd say, no, they told us that between 9 and 10 this morning that they would be testing the alarms, and so I think this is the test. Well, are you sure? Like, what if there was a fire during a test? And it's sort of like, well, if there was a fire during the test, we'd be able to hear the fire trucks because they're only 2 blocks away. The reason they're not coming is because as soon as they test it, they're on the phone with the fire department saying, I'm going to test them right now, and now I'm going to stop the test. I'm going to test them right now and stop the test. And so even though they can feel reassured that the building's probably not burning down and that I'm probably telling the truth, it will still be a really loud, annoying, distracting sound getting their attention. And I think in a big part, that's what all of us, not only kind of communities, but even therapists, are sort of just tired of the amount of times our alarm systems are going off. It's exhausting. And I think this brings us to the idea of depression. Because I do think COVID has kind of created this sort of weird sort of anxiety depression, kind of a combo thing. It's not really a major depressive episode. It's not really generalized anxiety disorder. It's like, I'm a little depressed, I'm a little anxious, I'm a little tense, I'm a little lazy, I'm a little apathetic, I'm a little impatient. It's sort of like all the things that we see for symptoms in depression and anxiety, all sort of commingling together on a day-to-day basis. And my own theory about depression is that depression is the other side of the anxiety coin, that most of the time when I see a very depressed person, I usually can go back and sort of see that they were a really anxious person for a really long time, and then they just got tired of being anxious, and so they just kind of do the give up thing. And so they don't want to get out of bed, and they don't want to take a shower, and they cry a lot, and they keep their blinds closed, and all the things that we sort of think of people with, profound depression. So I hope some of that makes sense to you. And I would be really surprised, in fact, I'd want you to unmute yourself and talk to me if you feel like you haven't been feeling any sense of anxiety and depression for the last 8 months, because I certainly know I have. And it is exhausting. Like, this is a very unique kind of exhaustion that we're all experiencing. And it manifests in lots of different ways. And so self-care, becomes really important, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I'm going to be quiet for a second and see if there are any questions that people have or anything people want to hear a little bit more or less about, whether on the chat function, or you can just unmute yourself and talk if you're feeling kind of a sense of bravery and confidence. Oh my God, some people are disappearing from the camera. Yeah, okay, all right. Well, I do have some questions, and I want to make sure that folks get some answers to them. My son is not doing well remotely. What if this is the same situation next year? So I don't know how old your son is, so we can sort of, maybe it doesn't matter if it's 4th grade or 10th grade or college. I'm finding very few kids are doing well remotely. Some are. Some parents are telling me that their kids have never been more focused, and the parents are actually wondering if maybe school was actually a very stressful place for their kid, and that working from home actually allows them the kind of quiet and peace of mind to be able to be more successful academically. But by and large, kids are really struggling with working remotely. And we have been doing, culturally, we have been doing a lot of we'll see conversations with kids. I sort of feel like it's the family where the kids say, can we go to Disney World? Can we go to Disney World? Yes, maybe next winter, or yes, maybe soon, or yeah, maybe in the spring. But yet you never really kind of get to Disney World. So I think kids were really excited to go back to school. Listening to the governor today, I don't know how long school might be around. I hope a while longer. It's unclear whether, what 2021 will look like at this point. And so I would encourage parents whose kids aren't doing well remotely to work as closely as they can with some of the support folks at school, because they're talking about this at school all day, every day. Because there are the hybrid kids, and then there are the totally remote kids. But it is very hard to get your education on a screen in front of you, and incredibly hard for teachers as well. Teachers have told me that to look at 18 empty boxes on their screen for the day and be teaching curriculum is like so has nothing to do with why they went into education. But I do think not prepare your kids for next year might be more remote again for a while, but get your own head in that space. And then there are, so let's take the remote piece and then let's bring it back to the parents. So I've been seeing families where the kids are going to school remotely, both parents have lost their jobs. So the tension in the house is really huge, financial and otherwise. And so the parents feel like they're stuck, doing all the education of their kids, and yet they're really kind of depressed and anxious at the same time. Then you've got the parents who were lucky enough to be able to keep their jobs and work remotely, but their kids are at home going to school and they don't have the time to monitor their kids and their classes and make sure they're doing their work or make sure they're not like playing on a different device underneath the keyboard out of the teacher's view. And so, and to be honest, I have to say, like, we were never meant to be with each other this much. Like, I think the reason we came up with jobs in schools is because it's really nice to get away from each other, And then you can come back and you can say, what was it like out there? But families can't really have these conversations because I'm with you all frickin' day. Like, what do I have to bring for news? How was your Zoom? Was it fun doing it from the guest bedroom instead of the living room? Like, there's really not much to say. We worried a lot there were some people back in April that were suggesting that we're going to get a big baby boom out of this. And there was a research think tank in DC that did some research that came out around July that said actually the opposite, like couples are having less sex because they're less interested in the person they're married to because they're sick of seeing them all day, every day. So we've lost the ability to have more novel experiences, and we're sort of moving back into that place again after today for a little while. No interfamily mingling. Should be fascinating to see how that works. But this is a lot of pressure on families, a lot of pressure. And so, how can each of you just be not only sensitive to your own capacity to be utterly exhausted a lot of the time, but also to recognize that the other people you live with are also doing the best they can. Whether it's toilet paper hoarding or thinking, God won't let me get COVID. Because there are these kind of crazy conversations in families, right now. It's sort of like, there's no reason why I can't go over to my friends. And it's like, well, yes, there is. And it's like, no, just because you don't have friends doesn't mean I can't go to see my friends. And, and that parent is like just wanting their kid to go somewhere so that they don't have to see them for a couple of hours. But yet there's a lot of hoops to jump through to make that happen. And so this is going to be a hard stretch, this winter piece, and people are already anticipating, the challenges that they're going to face. Because we're going to be really tired by February. And so I want you all to be thinking about what does November and December and January need to look like so that actually you're not all kind of crispy pieces of bacon by February, because it will be easy to feel exhausted, from the COVID fatigue, from the Zoom fatigue, from the Netflix fatigue, from the Governor Phil Scott fatigue. Like, we're all just, if anyone listened to the press conference today, I sort of thought, some of the press is getting a little cranky, and it's just sort of like, yeah, everyone's just a little crankier. I have a client who works at, I don't know if it's Home Depot or Lowe's or something, and he said, people aren't nice in the store. I'm like, you have to be in a pretty good place in life to be nice. And he said, well, why can't they just pretend? I'm like, they might have to pretend at home, so they don't want to have to pretend at Lowe's. It might be, you're getting the brunt of their bad day. So there are going to be grumpiness. I would encourage you to, in your own mind, this is sort of my philosophy in my house, most fights I'm going to relegate to due to the pandemic as opposed to due to relationship conflict, incompatibility. I'm just going to kind of write a lot off to, this bickering that goes on in the kitchen is really just COVID fatigue, getting expressed about, how high the string beans should be turned up to, and how long they should cook. Because really that stuff is not really that important, is it, at the end of the day? All right, I'm going to take another question. And again, I'll take questions from you folks too. I have people in my family who don't think any of this pandemic is serious. How do I deal with that? So that has not only been about the pandemic, that's also been about the election. But I'll stay out of politics right now. But it's the same kind of tension that's been going on in families. It's not worth fighting about. Who's ever asking the question. It's not worth fighting about because the goal shouldn't be to win in conversations with people you care about. So I would encourage asking more questions, seek to understand their position better versus telling them they're full of crap and that's ridiculous and look at all the people who are dying. Oh, they're making up the numbers. It's like they're not making up the numbers. It's sort of like, because we're all a little tired, we're a little more vulnerable to probably being a little more snappy in our conversations with each other. So seek to understand a little bit more and recognize that people can have differences. This is where it gets hard, and I'm seeing this about the holidays. I can't tell you in the last couple of weeks how many conversations I've had where my parents are having Thanksgiving. My brother and my sister and I and our families typically go. My sister and I don't want my other brother to go because he and his wife and their kids don't do a great job with social distancing and wearing masks. And mom and dad are older, and dad had heart surgery last year. And so we're thinking of telling them they can't come. And it's like, whew, kind of good luck with that. And some people have already tried those conversations and they have not gone very well. So I think there's also, it's possible for people who think differently than you to feel like you're judging their beliefs and their practices and punishing them for it. So I've been encouraging families that have this division in it to really sort of not move in the direction of let's exclude the people who are different than us, but sort of think about maybe we all do a different Thanksgiving or a different Christmas or a different Hanukkah with each other. Because I'm not sure the long-term ramifications of kicking somebody out, because they're not doing a good job while they know the whole family is getting together. That's a pretty tough pill for a lot of people to swallow. And so, again, I would think to work more toward compromise than exclusion. But I totally get where the exclusion comes from. I totally, I see some people in the building that I work with that I think sort of like, you never wear a mask in the hallway, and it's an insidious kind of judgment that goes on. There is actually another question very similar. When I see out-of-state cars, I get really judgmental and critical and don't like how worked up I get. How can I stop? And it's sort of like, oh, I am so there. It's like, I'm driving around Burlington, Texas. what are you doing here? Like, do we really have that many UVM students from Texas, and Hawaii? And I actually saw a Quebec car. I'm like, how'd you get in? It's just, it's really, it gives you a sense of how easily triggered your alarm system is. You walk into a store and the first 3 people you see don't have masks, and you think, I don't know if I'm going to stay in this store. You're sitting at a red light and you see Illinois, New York, Mass, Connecticut, New Jersey, and you sort of think, I know these people. I know these people aren't quarantining. I know these people came for the foliage. I know these people don't even care. They came here only because we have low prevalence of the virus, and then they're going to leave all their virus here. And it's just, it's automatic. It's automatic. So both around the family things and the out-of-staters, I think it's about sort of backing yourself away from the edges so that you don't tip over, because it's really easy to. It's survivalism. That, like looking at license plates. I have never looked at license plates more in my entire life than I have this year. Actually, I was at the farmer's market in Waitsfield this summer, and I'm like, you guys, there's only one Vermont car here. Can you believe that? All these people here are not from here. And then my friends who live in the valley said, well, but a lot of people have second homes here. Yeah, but how do you know they're at their second home, or they just didn't come for the weekend? Like, it's just, you just can't stop yourself. So practice stopping yourself, because it's not only not completely accurate of what the story is going on, but also is more of an indicator of your level of distress, not their level of misbehavior, if that makes any sense. Yeah. Okay. People want to, yeah, go ahead, Chrissy. Yeah.
I know a couple people on the call. We have multiple children, like 9 and 13, both going through.
9 and 13 children?
No, oh my, I wouldn't be surviving if I had 9 or 13 children, but I know a few of us here have a couple children, within a couple years of each other. And there's a lot of regression. I feel like we've worked hard as a family with our own therapists over the years to, tease out and be better with our family functions. And, there's a lack of the routine. There's the fear, the anxiety, and, like puberty is coming in, menopause is coming in. It's like a perfect storm, and sometimes like the children are just really, I don't know, like I go between feeling like I'm not my best self, not being patient like I should, regretting, either not getting along with my husband or my children, and then feeling guilty. And then it's just kind of a continuous cycle, but they are really hard, and even like physically chasing each other around, like stuff we haven't seen for years. And it's just like a whole new level of just concern. And we're like, we just kind of put our hands up, because at this point you can't take anything away, like the consequences. Oh, well, we used to say, if you could have a week of no touching your sister, you could go to the movies on Friday night, or you could have a sleepover. There's none of that. So no screen time.
Right. Sort of like, except all day.
Except, and they have to do their homework on their Chromebook, So hell no.
Yeah. Well, I asked the 9 and 13 is my mother is one of 14. So I grew up around very large families, and where sort of probably 7 or 8 was the average size. So I was being facetious, but I sort of think I think my grandmother would have chosen to die rather than have 14 children during a pandemic. Although, well, that being said, it was during polio. So the house had a big sign on it that said, whatever those signs said, quarantine or do not enter this house. It is hard. There's not, and I think, Chrissy, to that point, it's going to get harder because you can't throw them out as easily. I mean, I don't know why parents can't throw their kids out in the pouring rain or the 20 below zero. My mother certainly did. We would tell her we were cold and she would say, run around more. And sometimes we would send my littlest sister to the door, sort of like, can we come in? And she would say no, And so, I think it is okay to put kids outside. And if they're bored, boredom is the birthplace of creativity. So they'll figure out something out there. Plus, the clothes are way better than they were in the 60s in terms of they can be a little bit warmer than Nana's hand knitted mittens that are soaking wet, outside in the winter. But this picking on each other, it's pretty, Jack Canfield did a lot of rat research looking at population. And what he found is sort of as the rat population grew in this little kind of community he made for them, they started biting each other. And so I think that's probably what you're seeing even in children instead of rats is like, if I have to be in this space with you, I'm periodically just going to bite you. And in fact, some houses probably they are biting. But I think to realize that some of that is anxiety, and imagine if our anxiety about uncertainty and a lack of predictability is this high. Can you imagine someone whose frontal lobe is like this big trying to figure out what's going on? It's just so, they just know something's wrong and don't have any clear idea of how to think their way through it. Just like we can't, but we sort of pretend we can. But they don't even have that luxury of being able to pretend they can. So some of that is anxiety and distress. Some of that is literally physical energy, especially if the beater upper, like I was with two sisters, is the boy. That's a lot of like, you need to be tired. You need to be a lot more tired than you currently are. And so I'm finding more and more people are talking about this exhaustion, this sort of weird, unique kind of exhaustion. But I find it's a really cerebral exhaustion, like their heads are tired, like their bodies haven't done a thing all day long, for the most part. But their head has been like staring at these shoulders. I mean, I tell my partner I go to Hannaford's just to see what legs look like because I don't see any legs anymore in my day. And so I think, does anyone know Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer? So practically every episode, he would meet with pet owners and they would describe the problems they're having with their dog. And then he would work with them, sort of like those nanny shows that were on for a while. But every single episode, he talks with dogs about its exercise, discipline, and affection in that order. Like your kids need to be tired out. And it's really hard when the parents are even more tired, kind of mentally drained to sort of think like, what can I do to tire my kids out? And then discipline, I'm not talking about cracking the whip, but more sort of like a lot of structure. Because structure is something that kids put in the category of predictability. Like dinner is at 5:30 or at 6 o'clock every night, no matter what, which means that sometimes that's going to be really hard for you, but it's going to be really good for them to have something that happens at the same time. This is why it was so important to get kids back to school, because school is incredibly predictable for them. And so, it is asking more of parents, which means, parents have to make sure they're getting the support that they need from family, from friends. Who are you complaining to your kids about? Because, people used to do that a lot more in the 60s and 70s. I don't know why parents don't complain about their children anymore. They're certainly complaint worthy. But everyone wants to think, my kids are great. They're doing great. It's like, say my kids are driving me nuts, or, I can't stand them some days. It doesn't mean you're going to get rid of them. But the work of parenting is incredibly hard. And the kids don't help. Like they don't make parent, like how many kids go to their parents and say, I can tell this pandemic is really difficult for you. So I've decided to just really focus on kind of being a better kid and getting my work done and helping out around the house more. And I'd like to sign up for some chores, it's like, no. So they don't make it easier. But that biting each other, Chrissy, I would sort of say is energy and distress at the same time.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, and if you're a single parent, just the multiplier effect here. It's just all amplified even higher. The single parents are not doing great. And your comment about guilt, feeling like you're not doing the best job and then feeling guilty about it, I heard that all the time from parents before the pandemic. Like, parents know all the time that they're not perfect. So don't think you're like even less perfect now. It's the same amount of imperfection you've always had. It's just probably a little more noticeable because you never get away from your children.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, Chrissy.
Yes.
The one thing I remember when I fall into that same guilt thing, and thank God someone told me this once, is that it's actually good for our kids to see us not be perfect, because then they realize that when they get there, they aren't expected to be perfect either. But it's really important for us to be able to then, when appropriate and as appropriate, either apologize or explain to them, in their kind of terms, like what we're going through and what we're trying to figure out. Because then, we're sort of teaching them later on that, again, you're not expected to be this perfect, know how to do everything adult. And because that creates its own anxiety too. And someone told me that once. And so every time I start to feel like really heavy on myself, doesn't make it go away right away, but it definitely helps me remember. And then I get to at least ask myself, okay, is this an appropriate one or situation where I can sit down and talk it through with them? Or maybe it's not, because it's not always the case. But if it is, we try to do that with our son. And it's not perfect, but it definitely helps a little bit.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, it's also helpful for them to see you struggle. Let them see you crying. And mommy, what's the matter? Or daddy, what's the matter? And it's just sort of like, I'm just sick of all of this. It's sort of like, they are too, as opposed to, the only thing they need to know, they can know quite a bit about your kind of feelings about things. The thing that's most important for them is they want to know you still have it together. So you can cry and say, I'm going to be fine. I'm just tired today. Versus, I can't do this anymore. I don't know where you'll live next year. Refrain from those kinds of statements. But I had a dad I talked to a couple months ago who came into his Zoom call in tears. And he said he had to bring his son to a Little League game, but because his wife wasn't home from from work, he had to bring their young daughter with them, and she hates going to the Little League games. And so she was complaining the whole way, and they got all the way to the field, and the father realized he had forgotten masks. So they had to drive back home, and the son's having a fit because he's going to be late for the game, and the daughter's crying, saying, I hate the COVID, I hate the COVID, I hate the COVID. And, he said, I can't take it anymore, And of course he can, but sort of like it sort of felt like it just leveled him. Like, I'm already having a hard time with my job, which I'm probably losing. But then to see them struggle, and I can't even help them, I can't even sort of say, well, let's skip the mask today because his son won't be able to play and they won't be able to get out of the car without the mask. So there are so many steps to staying sane these days that parents lose a step or two, and they can kind of very quickly feel terrible about themselves and about the situation. So it would be normal to be miserable. Like I would factor that into your, daily existence. As I will have some period of misery during the day today. I should also try to figure out how to have some moments of joy too. But they might be small compared to kind of the hard parts. There are a lot more hard parts right now. And humans are very adaptable, kids even more adaptable than adults. But it's a big ask to be adaptable for a year and a half, 2 years. Like that's a really, our species hasn't been asked to do that for a long time. To sort of like, hold it together during very difficult conditions for over a year or more. So I even think back to the other pandemic that wasn't that long ago, which was the HIV and AIDS pandemic. You know, but that sort of, in terms of how that got managed in the United States, went relatively well, considering. But you think of other countries like African countries where it never really kind of went well. And so they ended up with, you know, so far I think 37 million people worldwide have died of AIDS. But I think sort of like, you know, until we can feel like there's some control over this, we can all feel pretty fragile a lot of the time. And the kids are going to feel it a little bit more because their understanding is, I mean, if you still think there's, you know, a tooth fairy, you know, then a pandemic is really hard to wrap your head around. You know, so these are going to be challenging times. All right. Will my kids be permanently changed by this? Well, I don't know. You people with kids, what do you think? You think your kids are going to be permanently changed by this? You can unmute yourself, Cindy.
I think I'm unmuted.
Yeah, you are. Yep.
Okay. Hi, Kevin.
How are you? Good to see you.
So, and maybe this goes along with children being changed too. I mean, as an adult, I feel really changed. I feel like I've built up this big barrier of masks and protective clothing and goggles and, you know, and then you start feeling like you see people in Mahurans and you're like, you know, really standing away from them. And the long-term effect of this, I mean, you just start feeling antisocial, not trusting people around you. Where have you been? What have you been doing? You know, I think this is going to take a lot to get over. So I can't imagine for children, you know, this is a really social time of their life. So, so are there things that parents can do and adults can do, whether it's regular FaceTiming with people or any suggestions on that?
Yeah, I mean, the social piece for kids is even more important. You know, I've had a lot of adults say to me sort of like, you know, I'm not designed to work from home. I'm a water cooler kind of person. I need the office setting. I need to see people in the hallways and say, hey, Joe, how was your weekend? Like, I can't do this stay-at-home thing. But even kids that are a little kind of to themselves a bit more are still probably a lot more social than a more introverted adult might be. And so this, I would hesitate to think it would be permanent. The word permanent and damage. Like, I'm not sure it's damage. It will did they say damage? No, permanently changed. Yes. So I'm not quite sure about the permanently. I think there will be changes. I think there's probably going to be elements of OCD that become normal. I think rather than sort of thinking people who are afraid of germs, you know, are a little too anal about things, I think we're going to sort of think of those people as the very responsible people, and the people who aren't afraid of germs are irresponsible. I think probably masks are going to be around for a while, the way they are in a lot of Asian countries, just like during cold and flu season, you know, people sort of wear masks. The hard part about sort of like helping kids socialize on FaceTime or Google Hangout or Zoom is it's the same as what they do all day. And so it's really hard to sort of kind of make that seem more appealing. So there are, I don't think I ever downloaded it. There is, I won't look it up. There is a website that it's for adults or kids where you can play games together on the site. If anyone knows it, you know, call it out. And so you can play, you know, chutes and ladders, you can play, you know, poker, you can play backgammon, you can play games with other people, and you're seeing them and talking to them while you're playing. You can also watch a movie with them too. So for people who have this kind of stuff available to them, like I think of things of find ways to connect laptops to TVs. They're bigger. They don't require this kind of intensity, you know, kind of just staring into the into the camera lens, so that you can get further away from it. But I think sort of more social family time. And again, I realize it's the big ask for the parents, but like playing games at night, no screen time, even though often that's all parents want too, is like, I just want to watch something and go to bed. That sort of, having time as a family together, popcorn on a Wednesday night, Wednesday night everyone gets, to stay up, 20 minutes later, breakfast for dinner, dinner for breakfast, sort of being foolish. If anyone listened to Morning Edition this morning on VPR, some father's kind of gone viral because he would make his kids, they were kids were going to school remotely, but he would put their backpacks on and they had to go outdoors and walk down the street and walk back and ring the doorbell. And he greeted them as their teacher. And, they had to have their lunch packed and everything. And so, but the only way they could get through the front door is they had to do a special dance. They had to create a special dance, and that was their sort of initiation. And I guess someone taped it and it went viral, and his father's kind of really famous now. But I sort of think like that's, kids need to be social, but that doesn't necessarily mean they can't get that social need met from adults too. Yes.
I'm going to be super optimistic.
Good.
So it's interesting because my whole family's been through a big health issue for the last 3 or 4 years, and that in and of itself created sort of a PTSD sort of response to just health and wellness. And I have been unbelievably surprised how resilient my kids have been based on what we've had to ask them to do for our health situation. And I think you eventually revert back to that place of ease because it's much easier to live in that space than it is to live in the space of anxiety. Mm-hmm. So I think we're drawn back to the middle, even if we're resisting it out of fear and everything else, that time,
Yep.
heals so much.
Yep.
And, it may go slower for some people in terms of your ability to sort of let go of all this once we've passed through the gauntlet.
Yep.
But I run higher anxiety in general, and I can say for myself, I really did come back towards the middle. It took me longer than my sons and my husband just because of our personalities, but it really does. And then, I joke with everybody is that being sort of a little germophobic OCD anyways, based on what we've been through, I'm like, I am so excited that I no longer have to feel bad for like not wanting to touch a doorknob and for like washing my hands and like wiping down the plane when we travel. Like I just got over it and was like, if people think I'm crazy, I don't really care. They have no idea what I'm going through. Mm-hmm. So to be able to do that now with freedom is like so exciting.
Yeah. Well, now it's actually considered role modeling.
Yeah, it's in vogue.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very optimistic, and I think it's funny. I have 2 boys, and 15 and 12, and they have their days when they're wrestling and they're driving me crazy. But I've also seen more. We're a pretty touchy, huggy family as it is, but I've seen more. Them needing to touch each other. Uh-huh. And sometimes that touch is just they'll cuddle on the couch and watch a show, and sometimes they'll be wrestling, and I just have to get over the fact that they need to touch each other and wrestle, and I gotta get over it. And then also the other really practical advice I was given when we were going through our health journey was laughing. And because it's heavy, all this is so heavy. It's just, that's life right now. Life is heavy. And I went through probably a week ago of soccer season had ended. It ended abruptly for us, and it was very sad. And I'm thinking, God, I know I'm competitive, but why is this bugging me so much? And I came to the reality that there was a lot of ending in it. It was that the seniors were graduating and we weren't going to see them again play soccer. It was that just we're back to, winter's coming, the numbers are rising, and that was, had an implication of its own. And then just the election, the COVID fatigue. And I literally binge watched a comedy, which I don't typically do that, but I was like, I got to distract my brain because my brain was in a loop, and I was looping around and around, over rethinking, stressing, planning. And I did that for like 48 hours. I mean, not straight for 48 hours, but close, as my husband in the background is saying. But it really did snap me out of it. So I do think like sitting down as a family and watching an appropriate comedy is a really good thing, just to laugh together, because we're doing so much stressing together that I think finding that laughter is really important.
Yep. Could not agree with you more. Just remember, you might rev a little high on anxiety, which means that you will probably outlive the people who get eaten by the sharks. So that's the upside of being a little more anxious. The trick is I just don't want to be dragged around by my anxiety. That's a little bit harder. But yes, I think, your move back to the center comment, makes me think of some research. With COVID, I can't remember time. I can't believe we're almost out of November, but yet March seemed like it was 6 years ago. But it might have been 8 or 10 years ago. There was some research out of Sweden, I think, looking at happiness, not sort of the happiness research that they sometimes are doing in Bhutan and other places. But what they found is that that kind of people's level of happiness, contentment, stability, even when pushed way off track by, say, a serious illness, a death, a terminal illness, a natural disaster, that over time they actually go back to where they were. And so that would go with somebody who doesn't experience a lot of happiness in life. If they had something really amazing happen to them, they would eventually revert back to their less than happy self. That the research was sort of suggesting that we have sort of a place on a happiness scale that we do revert back to over time, even when very, very difficult things have happened. So I think that's some of that kind of happiness research sort of is kind of linked to resiliency research that sort of they started doing after World War II, looking at how is it that some people came out of the concentration camps and went back to their villages and got married and had kids and had really wonderful lives, and other people never were able to get over the experience in the camps. And so that's what started that first idea of thinking about, like, where does resiliency come from? And so you all are in a unique position, within yourselves for your own resiliency, but also sort of if you're a parent, to sort of think like, how do I build this child's sense of bouncing back from things? Because, there's, your comment about soccer, I've heard so much of that in the fall. Like parents sort of feeling the loss of soccer even almost more than the kids, because it was sort of like a normal thing that wasn't even that normal, but a normal thing that now is also being taken away. And now there's just a big question mark about, will there be skiing, or will there be basketball, or it's just like, I was so happy for that month and a half, during soccer season. So, I mean, that's how much we're craving sort of a return to normalcy. Yes, Nancy? Oh, Nancy said goodbye. All right. I saw a hand go like that. It looked like a question. Do we have time for another question? Question from the group, or should I pull another one off of the list that people submitted in advance? All right, I'll go for it. How do you suggest dealing with older people who live alone? So what I have seen over this time, if I were to sort of rank order just from my practice, so it's not a very big sample size, sort of the people who have been struggling the most, college students, they have really struggled with this go back home and live with their parents. And I think some of it is, most of them are under 20, and there's not been a lot of difficulty in the last 20 years except for the recession, but the recession probably was when they were around 10, and so it was a little under their radar. So they've not really been kind of clobbered with something this significant. It's also far enough away from the wars in the Middle East that sort of seems more historical for them. And then next are single people, including older people who live alone. And then the next group would be the people living alone who don't have a dog or a cat. And then from there are lots of others. So the older people living alone. So I have, so my mom's the one of 14. She's 10, number 10. And her oldest sister is 96 and lives in South Burlington. And on her own, you know, in her own house, she drives. Questionable. So mostly to church and to Hannaford's. And so, you know, I went over to see her. I go over and see her periodically. And she said, you know, I'm really depressed. And I said, I'm sure you are. And she said, you know, no one's touched me, you know, since February. And her kids live out west. And so she's not seen them since last year. And she said, you know, this is just, I feel like this is, not that I'm dying, but I feel like this is such a horrible way to die, like to live almost 100 years and you die in a pandemic. And so, you know, she is really craving, you know, I finally broke down, and I did confess to her children, so I'm not saying anything I shouldn't say. But I told her I invented a COVID hug where we both look left and hold our breath. And she hung on, you know, like she was never going to let go. So then I called my cousins and I said, I may have killed your mother. And they said, that's okay. I'd rather have her die having been hugged than die completely untouched for a year. So I said, I know, but I felt bad. It's like, it's okay, Kevin. But like, they're not doing well. You know, it's a lot of TV or a lot of reading. Some of the older people I've talked to that have hobbies that they really like, you know, sort of this kind of emptiness, anxiety, depression has made it even harder for them to even be interested in kind of knitting, needlepoint, woodworking. Like they just, it's really, really tough. So if you know those people, you know, on top of parenting and doing your job, like I'm not giving you enough to do already, you know, how do you know, if you're making beef stew for dinner, make extra and just bring some over to somebody, you know, and stand at their front door, even though the governor said not to do that, but you can probably stand, you know, a bit ways from the front door and talk with them for a few minutes before they get cold and have to shut it. But I do think we do have to look out for the older people. And at the same time, some of them, like my other aunt, who's slightly younger, 84, I see her at Hannaford's all the time. Her children have forbidden her to go. She goes anyway. And I say to her, what are you doing here? And she goes like this. I know, I'm so bad. I'm so bad. I just don't tell the kids. Don't tell the kids. And, you know, and she's wearing her mask on her chin, you know. It seems to be a popular style, you know, not your mouth and nose, but on your chin. And I said, you know, aren't you worried? And she said, well, I have a different way of thinking about the virus. And I said, well, maybe it would be good to have a CDC way of thinking about the virus instead of your own unique, special way of thinking about a virus. But she's not worried, you know. And I don't know, I haven't actually dug deep with her, but I don't know if that's because maybe at a certain age you sort of think like it's okay. You know, like I don't want to interrupt my life so much that I don't recognize my life anymore. Maybe she goes to Hannaford's to see legs too, you know, like I do, like just to see someone move, because I'm not moving most of the day. But I would ask if you know older people, or you've got, particularly if you know people in your neighborhoods, do check in on them because they're not doing great. Not that any of us are doing that great, you know, but as Kristen said, sort of like, let's all sort of like aim for the positive, hopeful side of that. And I do think even when we put out that little extra energy sometimes to someone who's doing worse than we are, we do get a bit of a return on the investment. You know, you do feel like you made a contribution, even if you did yell at your kids, you know, inappropriately in the afternoon, you at least help somebody who was 80. Yeah, yeah. So I think we're out of time, folks. I appreciate you hanging in, like we want to do more screen stuff, like we want to talk more about COVID. But I am really encouraging all my clients and all my friends. We have to be talking more about it, even though there's not necessarily anything you can do about it, because keeping it in and sort of feeling like it's just complaining, why should I bother? That stuff kind of festers. And it's like, it's like stuff in Tupperware containers at the back of the fridge after a while. Yeah, it's pretty gross. It's pretty gross. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin, and everyone for joining us. And hopefully we will, when we run this on the Mad River Valley Channel 44, and when we link it onto Hannah's House, I could send the link out to you folks, and you could share it with people that you think might find it helpful. And I do believe we're going to be putting an informal Zoom parent support group together in the coming weeks, and I'll also send out an invite to that, and that's going to be you don't have to commit. It's going to be one of those things you can jump on if you want. But I think it's great that you came, Kevin, and you brought us some laughter, and we know we're not alone in this, no matter what our life is like. So I just really appreciate it. It was wonderful.
Well, I appreciate it, and you're not alone. Even your therapist is going through the same thing you're going through. Yeah, so it's all of us together.
Chrissy, will you share that when you do put the parent support group together, will you be sharing that with the local principals as well so they can put that in their school newsletters like you did with this?
Yes.
Awesome.
Thank you for that reminder, Amy. That's a good.
Ian, would you mind putting that game website up again before you go? Maybe she went. The game website that you put up.
There was a few of them. If you give me just a half a second, and Chrissy, if you wait just a second, I'll copy the names and.
Right. It's like is it House Party? Was that one of them?
There's a few. There's a bunch of them. There's
Yeah.
like Among Us, and then there's Discord, which is really more towards video gaming, but it definitely, and kids will know what that is. Twitch, Jackbox, Mattel actually has their own. There's a Mattel online, but I also found a great little article with like 6 top board game websites. So those of us that are looking for more of a board game type experience.
Yeah.
So I'll paste all of those things right into a chat comment real quick, and then people can copy paste it out of there. But those were so 2 of them you'll see. One of them's the Mattel online link. One of them is the link to the article that had multiple board game sites to check out. And then the other ones are just bulleted lists.
Thank
Great.
you.
Great.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah, that was a great suggestion. Kevin, you almost feel like you're with your family when you do that. I mean, it
Yeah.
really is great.
Well, one of the things that I've been doing, Cindy, is like I'll actually be doing it tonight when I go home. So some of my college friends, we've actually connected a lot more since this. But I will Zoom with a friend or two while I'm making dinner, and I'm not looking at it. Like it's just sitting on the counter, and I'm like chopping vegetables, and and I turn and look occasionally at them, and they're cooking in their kitchen. Because if you sort of think like that's what it would be like if you were at their house, you wouldn't just sit and stare at them. You would be doing other things. You can walk off camera and walk back, and so I do think sort of like, is there a way to bring some of technology's use into trying to mimic some of what our interactions used to look like more regularly?
Great idea.
Yep. All right, folks, all have a good evening and a good weekend, and whatever you do for the holiday, it's not the only time you can have turkey, so you can do turkey again some other time. But be safe.